Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome back to Cinematic Reviews. As always, I will be your host, Chris, and this is a show about all things movies and TV. But we return for Marvel Friday with Doctor Strange, the first Doctor Strange movie in Phase 3. Also, we've got another movie reaction and a couple of news items to cover. One really disappointing news that we got the other day, so we'll talk about that as well in the show. We'll get into Doctor Strange. We'll break that down, and then we'll do all the rankings like we always do to end the episode today. Also, check out the rest of Marvel Fridays. We're now at episode, I believe, 15 in Marvel Friday, leading up to Avengers Doomsday, the newest Avengers film to come out on December 18th. We've also got Daredevil Born Again Season 2 coming out here shortly. We have Spider-Man Brand New Day this summer in July. We just talked about Wonder Man, which is the newest Marvel project to come out this year in 2026. So go ahead and check out that episode as well. But we're back in the theatrical timeline for Marvel Friday with Doctor Strange. Also, check out the social media pages for Cinematic Reviews. I post all the artwork from each and every episode, as long as breaking news and other items related to the show. As a reminder, too, you can watch the show every week at youtube.com/the cinematic reviews. You can also listen to the audio version on your favorite podcast service, whichever you prefer. We're on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, of course, and a few others as well. So go ahead and check that out. So with that, let's head over to news and reactions for a couple of news items and a reaction film that just released a little bit ago. So the first item I want to touch on today is a bit of a disappointing one, and that is actor James Van Der Beek has sadly passed away on February 11th after his battle with cancer. He, of course, starred in Dawson's Creek and Varsity Blues. He will be greatly missed, so thoughts and prayers go out to his family and closest friends. He will be truly, truly missed. I grew up watching Dawson's Creek and, of course, Varsity Blues. I has been a couple of years with him first announcing that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and now that journey and battle has come to an end. He has stated numerous times in interviews that being diagnosed with cancer was the best thing to happen to him because he was able to cherish life and make massive changes in his lifestyle at that point. So again, thoughts and prayers go out to James Van Der Beek's family and closest friends. On a little bit of a lighter note, we've got a movie release reveal, and that is The Mummy 4 is coming in theaters early summer of 2028. Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz are set to return in their respective roles from the franchise. This is super exciting. I grew up with The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. We, of course, got a third movie, which didn't do as well as they wanted to, but the first two Mummy movies are by far classics for sure, especially for Brendan Fraser's filmography that kind of skyrocketed him into stardom and put his face out there for all to love and adore. He has now made a huge comeback in most recent years with The Whale and the Rental Family, which we covered also on the episode, one of the episodes as well. And now he is set to return to the franchise that, like I said, catapulted him into superstardom in Hollywood with The Mummy 4. Nothing really else has been revealed as of yet. Looks like Universal will be running the show once again, along with Searchlight, which has done the previous ones. You remember when Tom Cruise tried to reboot the franchise with his Mummy movie, that, of course, went plummeting into the ground like a dismantled rocket into the earth. So they are going to try once again to reboot this franchise. Well, not necessarily reboot, but try to revitalize this franchise with bringing back Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, which I think is a very smart idea to do. Their characters are absolutely beloved by all the fans, especially the fans of the Mummy franchise. Looks like it is set to hit theaters on May 19th. 2028, so very early summer schedule. So that's very, very exciting. I can't wait to watch this film. And then today's reaction film. Since we're doing Doctor Strange, I thought, why not react to Rachel McAdams' newest film, Send Help? Sam Raimi's newest horror film as well. Also starring Dylan O'Brien, who I absolutely love. I think he's a very underrated actor, and he's terrific in this film alongside Rachel McAdams. If you're not familiar with Send Help or haven't really given it much thought with all the trailers and advertisements coming out, it is about an employee and her insufferable boss becoming stranded on a desert island, the only survivors of the plane crash as they were going on a business trip to, I believe, China or Thailand or something. I can't remember exactly what country they were going to, but it was out in the east part of the world. Here, they must overcome past grievances and work together to make it out alive. Rachel McAdams is fantastic in this film. She really digs into her psycho crazy phase where she just absolutely loves, survival techniques and being in this situation. Whereas Dylan O'Brien, being this hotshot CEO that inherited this company by his unfortunate passing of his father, he has no idea how to survive on his own, and he must rely on Rachel McAdams' character, Linda, who has busted her butt, her entire career at that company, working for Dylan O'Brien's dad. Now that she has been passed up for a promotion based on, looks and popularity within the office. So this kind of turns the tables a little bit where now she is the boss. She is calling the shots because she has all the knowledge and talent to survive on this desert island. A big kind of niche to her character too is that she is a huge fan of the Survivor show. There's that scene in the movie where they find her audition tape for the Survivor show, and that really tells you what the character is. She absolutely was born to be in this situation, and it kind of goes to her head a little bit. I won't reveal, how the ending is, just in case you want to see it yourself, because it is a pretty interesting twist that Sam Raimi does to end this movie. But it's really fascinating. It's got really good cinematography within the island. There's different parts of the island that we get to discover. We get to see, Rachel McAdams actually perform life-saving tasks to survive on an island, like gathering water, hunting for food. There's that scene in the trailer where you get to see her hunt a boar to last them for a couple of days. She collects water with leaves into a coconut shell. She builds structures on the beach for shelter when the rain and hurricane happens. It's kind of like a how-to or a survival 101 movie, on top of it being a intense thriller / horror film. And Sam Raimi does a fantastic job with bringing this situation to life and kind of bringing a new twist on, desert islands. We get the probably most famous one is Tom Hanks's Castaway. We get a couple of scenes in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise when Jack Sparrow is abandoned on a desert island. And then now Send Help is a part of that genre of films, and fantastic job. Looking at the box office so far, this was released on January 30th, so it's been out for about 2 to 3 weeks. I just saw this past weekend finally, so I thought perfect timing. We're covering Doctor Strange. Why not talk about Rachel McAdams' new film as well? The budget was roughly about $40 million, so pretty low. And so far, worldwide, it has grossed $54 million. So it's made its money back, and now it's kind of seeing the profits come through as well. Looks like $37 million so far in just the U.S. and Canada, which is a pretty solid number for a horror film as such as this. So check out Send Help today in theaters right now. Eventually it'll come on streaming services, but this is a movie you're going to want to see with a big crowd, big sound, the biggest screen possible, because this is quite a journey you get to go on with other people in the audience, and you get to see what an island or being stuck on an island does to a person's psyche, and how do they get out of it. So check out Send Help today in theaters right now. So that does it for news and reactions today. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll dive into our featured film of the day, Doctor Strange. This episode is brought to you by Dubby Energy. Still drinking energy that quits before you do? Stop crashing, stop shaking, and start performing. Meet Dubby Energy, clean energy made for gamers, creators, and anyone who refuses to slow down. With zero sugar, no jitters, and no crash, W keeps you locked in whether you're grinding ranked, streaming for hours, or pushing through those late nights. There's no crash, no fade, just gas. Drink different, perform better. Grab W Energy and use code Cinematic10 to get 10% off your order today.
You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole. You've spent your life trying to widen it. Your work saved the lives of thousands. What if I told you that reality is one of many?
I don't believe in fairy tales about chakras or energy or the power of belief.
You wonder what I see in your future? Possibility.
Why are you doing this?
There are other ways to save lives. So much you don't know.
Teach me.
So Doctor Strange is a Marvel character I somewhat grew up with. I was pretty familiar with what the character, who the character was, how his powers kind of worked, and some of the villains that he fought throughout his Marvel Comics timeline leading up to that point. When they announced that Doctor Strange would be getting a live action film, I got super excited about it. It's a character that we haven't really been exposed to other than the comics, of course, and then some of the cartoons. There was that I think it was like 77, 78 film, Doctor Strange, that kind of got lost in the dust, similar to the old Fantastic Four movie that they did back in the day. I've never seen that one. This was the only and first Doctor Strange movie I ever watched, other than some of the Avengers or Marvel cartoon movies and TV shows that were on back in the 90s. But I was super excited, especially when Benedict Cumberbatch was cast. I thought he was a great person to pick for this role. He's got the look, he's got the acting chops, he's got the mannerisms, and it seems like he was very excited to do the character himself. He wasn't a big comic book fan, but once he was cast in this role, he really did his research, bought a bunch of Doctor Strange comic books at a local comic book store, dressed up as the character, and just really embodied that. Now, with him having 2 solo films, being in the Avengers films, Infinity War and Endgame, also being kind of a co-star in Spider-Man No Way Home, he's really kind of become a centerpiece of Marvel today in these newest phases. But when he was first introduced in Phase 3, we were kind of getting familiar with him. A lot of fans weren't too hardcore Doctor Strange fans. Probably similar to like Iron Man back when that came out in 2008. Everybody knew of Iron Man, but he was kind of a lower tier hero in probably people's power rankings, if you want to, put a football analogy on there. But Doctor Strange was probably a little bit more, not necessarily popular, but more talked about than Iron Man. But I kind of like to compare those two, at least in my own experience, because they weren't, characters I draw closer to. I first went for Spider-Man, Captain America, Hulk, Wolverine, Deadpool, those kind of characters. Whereas Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, they were more side characters. Even Hawkeye, wasn't too familiar with Hawkeye until the MCU came. And that's the kind of the beauty of the MCU over the years. This came out in 2016. What was the exact date here? November 4th, 2016. So this was kind of around the Halloween Thanksgiving time, which was kind of unusual for a while for Marvel. A lot of the movies were coming out in the summer, in the May months, and then I think Thor. Some of the Thor movies came out in November, so there's kind of all over the place throughout the year. But I thought that was a great time too for Doctor Strange to come out in November. You know, everyone's coming off of Halloween, they're getting ready for Thanksgiving, getting ready for the holidays, and why not throw a big blockbuster movie their way? A movie like this would normally, you know, get released in like June or July, but with Marvel deciding to throw this out in November. Now, of course, this is the same year that Captain America Civil War came out, so that probably overshadowed it a little bit, you know, being labeled Avengers 2.5. But this still was a pretty impressive movie. Looking at the box office, it had a budget of $165 million, which not a massive budget on Marvel standards as of right now. But then it ended up grossing a whopping $677 million worldwide, 232 million of that just in the US and Canada. So this was a massive win for Marvel, especially with that time frame of the year, when blockbusters like this don't normally get released then. So it was definitely a risk on their part, but they ended up collecting on it, and it ends up being a smart move for them. And Benedict Cumberbatch now has joined a massive comic book franchise, and he is one of the most beloved characters now. I'm excited to, when we get to Infinity War, his character is very, very vital to that storyline and leading into Endgame. And I think Benedict Cumberbatch does a fantastic job. We've talked about him a little bit on the podcast, but now we really get to I want to take some time to really dive into his filmography, because he's had quite an interesting career so far. I think this movie is probably what really attracted people to him. But I first remember him in The Imitation Game, where he played, what was the character's name? Alan Turing, during World War II, where he was tasked to decipher some messages from the Nazis during World War II. But I think the film that really introduced a lot of people to him and was the Star Trek Into Darkness film from J.J. Abrams, where he played Kong. It was the kind of reimagining of Star Trek Wrath of Khan, probably the most popular, most beloved of the Star Trek movies, I'm guessing. I'm not a huge Trekkie. I'm a Star Wars guy, so you can feel free to come at me in the comments. I will defend Star Wars over Star Trek till the day I die. But Star Trek is still a fun franchise. It's just, growing up, I leaned more towards the Star Wars franchise than I did Star Trek. But when J.J. Abrams came out with his take on Star Trek, I was blown away. I really like his take on it. And then when Into Darkness came out and Benedict Cumberbatch was cast as Khan, and when you went to see that back in 2013, I was like, I would absolutely love Benedict Cumberbatch. He's fantastic as this villain, as this antagonist. And then he gets cast as Doctor Strange, as a hero, which is even more awesome. And I was super excited because, like I said, I thought he would be the perfect casting for Doctor Strange. And in the fun facts, I was able to dive in and find some what if castings for this role. But I think Benedict Cumberbatch was the guy to have, and it shows on screen, especially in this movie where I didn't really know what to expect. You know, with the trailer during the episode here that you see before when we were on break, that's the first trailer I ever saw when Doctor Strange was coming out and they were doing all the promotions and marketing for it. And it looked like it was grabbing some ideas and visuals from Christopher Nolan's Inception. And that's what really excited me, because Inception is one of my favorite Nolan movies ever. So this is exactly a movie for me. So I got super excited when this was coming out in 2016. He was also a part of the Hobbit franchise, or the Lord of the Rings franchise, to get really technical, as the voice of Smaug, the dragon that Bilbo Baggins encounters while on this journey through Middle Earth. Then he does return as Smaug in the third film as well in that trilogy. He stars in Black Mass alongside Johnny Depp as Billy Bolger. Then Doctor Strange comes out. Then he gets cast as Sherlock alongside Martin Freeman as Watson, fellow MCU cast member as well. And he's fantastic as Sherlock. Now, I love Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock for sure. But what he did on this show was fantastic. Absolutely loved it. This was the BBC version of Sherlock. It had about, I think, what was it, like 10 or 15 episodes. It was pretty short-lived. Each season had probably 3 episodes, but they were probably like mini movies themselves. But he's truly fantastic as Sherlock. Then he goes on to appear in Thor Ragnarok alongside Chris Hemsworth and Mark Ruffalo. Then he returns for Infinity War. Then he voices the Grinch in his own Grinch movie, which was really, really good. I really liked it. Then he stars as Shere Khan in Mowgli, The Legend of the Jungle, which is adaptation of the Jungle Book, of course. Then he returns to Marvel once again for Endgame. And then he shows up in 1917, the Christopher Nolan film Sam Mendes, excuse me. I'm thinking of Dunkirk was Christopher Nolan. Sam Mendes did 1917, which he played, what was his character in here? Colonel Mackenzie. I remember him. Then he does a few episodes of The Simpsons. And then he does Power of the Dog for Netflix, which was his kind of Oscar push. But he ends up, I don't think he ended up winning anything for that one. Let's look here real quick. I know it won a couple of awards, but I don't think Cumberbatch won it for actor. I think he was nominated. Yes, he was nominated, but he did not win. It did win in Best Achievement in Directing, but he was nominated. So that was kind of his Oscar push, like I said. Then he joins Marvel once again for Spider-Man No Way Home, which is awesome in there, teaming up with Tom Holland. Then he returns for his own sequel alongside Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch, which we'll get to once we get into Phase 4. I really like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I know a lot of people didn't really care for it, but I actually like Multiverse of Madness more than this first film, which is probably a hot take, and I'm ready to die on that hill because I do really like Multiverse of Madness, and I'm super excited to rewatch it on the podcast. We covered it when it did come out back in 2022 as one of the first episodes that we did on the show. So it's going to be really cool to kind of revisit this after all these years on the podcast. Then he lent his voice as Doctor Strange in the What If series, which I'm kind of on the fence of adding onto Marvel Friday. As we've been going through this journey on Marvel Fridays for the show, I'm starting to lean more towards maybe just dedicating an entire episode for all 3 seasons of What If instead of like breaking them up into theatrical timeline. So TBD on that, but I'm kind of leaning towards doing a bonus episode where we just talk about all 3 seasons because there's a lot of episodes to cover. But I really, really enjoyed What If. It's just I don't really consider it as part of the main timeline. It's kind of just an offshoot of the MCU in this vast multiverse, as they say in Doctor Strange. But we might end up just doing a What If episode, but TBD on that for sure. So yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch is an actor that I've really gotten to love. I think if you're looking at his filmography, I think this is probably my favorite role of his, and then probably Khan from Star Trek. I think he's just fascinating as Doctor Strange. His approach to the character, it's just really, really entertaining. Now, his co-star, Rachel McAdams, who plays Dr. Christine Palmer, we talked about her already in Send Help. I don't think we've really talked about her on the show, so this is probably a first. So we're going to kind of look at the highlights of her filmography, just kind of a nice refresher. I think the first thing I remember seeing her in was probably Wedding Crashers as Claire. And then eventually I kind of went back and I saw her in The Hot Chick, Mean Girls, that came out in 2004. Then The Notebook, which is probably one of her most beloved films, maybe. I've only seen The Notebook like once. Maybe I do need to revisit that uh, with Ryan Gosling, the romantic epic, as IMDb labels it. But yeah, I think Wedding Crashers from 2005 was probably the first time I ever was introduced to her. Then she goes into The Time Traveler's Wife. Then she stars in Sherlock Holmes alongside Robert Downey Jr., which is probably the second time I saw her, because I remember going to Sherlock Holmes opening weekend and be like, oh, that's a Claire from Wedding Crashers. So that's kind of my link to her. And then she could return for the sequel, of course, A Game of Shadows. It sounds like there's a bunch of rumors going around that Downey might be up for a third Sherlock Holmes, which him and Jude Law have been trying to get made. And I hope they do, because I really, really liked his take on Sherlock Holmes alongside Jude Law's Watson. Then she stars in Southpaw with Jake Gyllenhaal. She's fantastic in Southpaw, and I like Southpaw in general. I think eventually we're gonna do like a boxing event on the show, and that's definitely going to be one of them. Southpaw is one of the best boxing movies I've ever seen. I absolutely love it, and she's fantastic in there as Jake Gyllenhaal's wife, who unfortunately ends up passing away. So spoiler alert if you haven't seen that movie, but it's been almost 11 years, so spoiler. Then she kind of stars in her own season of True Detective, season 2. Then she stars in Spotlight, which we will definitely be doing on the show. I think we're going to do a double feature with Spotlight and Zodiac, kind of doing a, historical / newspaper films. So we're going to do a double feature there at some point. She's fantastic as Sasha Pfeiffer, one of the journalists that covers the pre-scandal in the U.S. Then this is where she gets into Doctor Strange in 2016. And then she goes into the comedy sphere with Game Night and Eurovision, which my dad and I love Eurovision. That's definitely a movie I want to cover eventually on the podcast. Maybe if we do like a Netflix event, we'll do that one. But she's fantastic with Will Ferrell. And then she, of course, lends her voice as well in an episode of What If as Christine. And then she returns in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness as Christine. And then recently, like we just talked about, she stars in Send Help with Dylan O'Brien when they get stranded on an island. So yeah, I really like Rachel McAdams. She's kind of an actress that I unfortunately forget about a lot, but when she does pop up in films, I'm like, yeah, Rachel McAdams is in here. I'm really, really excited for this. And she does a really good job as Dr. Christine Palmer in this film. She's basically the love interest for Doctor Strange, but they end up not like officially be together. But in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, if you remember, that's when Strange like really admits and realizes that Christine's the one that he will always love. He has that really great line, probably one of my favorite lines in Multiverse of Madness, where he tells you that he loved her in every universe, and that's really good moment for the character and their relationship for sure. So Rachel McAdams is awesome as Christine Palmer. Then we get to Mordor, the kind of not really sidekick, but kind of the explainer to the audience. He's kind of our tutor or traveling guide as we go through this new part of the MCU that we're discovering with the magical dimensions and different things like that, getting introduced to this new part of the world. He is played by, I can never pronounce his name, but we're going to try it here, Chiwetel Ejiofor. He has been in a bunch of movies. I love it when he pops up in here. I think one of the more underrated roles that he has done was what was it? It was 999. He is great as Michael in there. If you want a really cool, underrated crime action thriller, check out 999. It's got quite a heavy cast. It's got Casey Affleck, Anthony Mackie, Woody Harrelson, Aaron Paul, Kate Winslet, Gal Gadot is in here, Norman Reedus is in here, Michael Kenneth Williams is in here. Like, it's got such a stacked cast, and it's a very underrated movie, I think. I really, really like it. So check out 999 if you want some more of that. He was in The Martian, which he's fantastic in there as Vincent Kapoor. He was in Salt, 2012, American Gangster, Inside Man, Four Brothers as Victor Sweet. That actually might be the first time I've seen him in a movie with Four Brothers. Really, really like that. That's a really kind of forgotten Mark Wahlberg movie. If you haven't seen that one, definitely check that one out. I love watching that one. He was in Love Actually. So he's been in quite a few movies here. 12 Years a Slave, Doctor Strange, of course, The Lion King as he voiced Scar. He was in Maleficent, Infinite with Mark Wahlberg again. Then he returns in Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. He ended up popping up in Venom. And now, most recently, looks like he lent his voice in Star Trek Starfleet Academy, that animated show in the Star Trek universe. But he's great. I love his performance in here. Mordor is a character that they teased in the post-credit scene as kind of being the villain, but then they just never really followed through with that. When he comes back for Multiverse of Madness, it's a variant of him. So, and that's the thing that's kind of frustrating with in the MCU lately is, if you remember a lot of these Phase 3, Phase 4 post-credit scenes, they haven't really done anything with them, and it's really unfortunate. I would have liked to see more Mordor. Now, I hope they bring him back, maybe as a variant or in Doctor Strange 3. But they really need to bring him back because I think that's a really forgotten character in the MCU, and it'd be nice to see him after all these years of not really being involved in the MCU other than the Doctor Strange movies, even though they teased him to have a bigger role, maybe even being the villain of a Doctor Strange film. So TBD on that. Then we get the Ancient One, played by Tilda Swinton, who I really like. She does a great job in here. Now, I know the big backlash for this casting was that in the comics, the Ancient One is an old white guy. But, of course, the MCU wanting to be different, wanting to do a different take, they went with Tilda Swinton, who did a really good job. I really like her performance in here. She's very wise, and has really good chemistry with Benedict on screen as they interact with each other. Pretty sure the first movie I've seen her in was, I want to say, Narnia as the White Witch. I'm looking at her. Nope. It was actually probably Constantine, because I did see Constantine before Narnia, even though they did come out in the same year. So maybe Constantine was the first one as Gabriel. Fantastic movie for sure. I think they're doing a Constantine 2 with Keanu. I hope they do, because he was a really good John Constantine. Really, really awesome early 2000s movie. So like I said, the Narnia movie. Then it looks like she did Curious Case of Benjamin Button in 2008, the David Fincher film with Brad Pitt, where he is born an old man and then ends up, going in reverse. It's a pretty crazy movie. It's definitely my least favorite Brad Pitt performance and least favorite David Fincher film, but it's one I like to visit every now and then when I do a Fincher marathon, because it's an interesting a premise. It's based off a book, of course, but it is a pretty weird and wild movie. Then she shows up in Snowpiercer, which is another movie my dad and I really like watching. That was a surprise hit. Chris Evans, Tilda Swinton, who else was in here just for fun? Ed Harris, John Hurt. That one has quite quite a cast. If you're not familiar with Snowpiercer, it's about this future version of the world where people are living on this train uh, called the Snowpiercer, and they must survive their time on this train in this new like class system, kind of like Hunger Games and movies like that. So that's really cool. And they ended up doing a show for it as well. I never did watch the show because I was so attached to the Chris Evans movie. And she pops up in the Grand Budapest Hotel, Trainwreck. Then this is when she does Doctor Strange. So she's entering the MCU in 2016. She does pop up again in Endgame as the Ancient One when she talks with the Hulk as they travel back in time to get the Infinity Stones. She was in Uncut Gems as one of the auction voices. She lends her voice in What If as the Ancient One. Then she joins Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio a few years ago. She was in Asteroid City. She popped up in The Killer, another Fincher one. She showed up in The Boys as the voice of the octopus for what's his name? The Deep. His little weird girlfriend, I guess you could, the wife, or it's such a weird relationship where he's in love with that octopus and it's voiced by Tilda Swinton. It's freaking crazy. That's probably the most recent thing I've seen her in, but she's great as the Ancient One. I really like her in the MCU as this character. She does a fantastic job, and I'm not attached to the comic book version of Doctor Strange, so I really don't care that it was a white old man and now it's a white woman. Like, I don't care. I look at the performances, and her performance was really, really good. She had really good chemistry with Benedict Cumberbatch for sure. Then we have Benedict Wong, who stars as, surprise, surprise, Wong, who during Phase 4 was kind of the character linking person, where he kind of took that role of Agent Coulson, where he would pop up in some of the shows or some of the movies just to kind of remind you, like, hey, this is a connected universe. But this is where we get introduced to him, and he's really, really awesome. I really like Benedict Wong. He too starred in The Martian, so he's quite a range as an actor, and I really like it. Probably the most fun we had with Wong was probably, even though it wasn't a great show, the She-Hulk show. He has quite a bit to do in there. He pops up in Infinity War, which was fun to see, and a little bit in Spider-Man No Way Home. So, but he's a fan favorite for sure. And then the villain of the movie is Caecilius, played by Mads Mikkelsen, Mr. Hannibal himself. I don't think we really talked about him, which is unfortunate because he's great. I love Mads Mikkelsen. He will forever be Le Chiffre to me in Daniel Craig's Casino Royale, which is, I think, the first. Yeah, it has to be the first thing I saw him in. I know he's been in some stuff before that, like King Arthur as Tristan and back in 2004. But I saw Casino Royale before King Arthur, so I'm pretty sure that's the first time I remember seeing him as Le Chiffre. Then he shows up in Clash of the Titans with Sam Worthington, the Three Musketeers remake, then Doctor Strange, and then he joins the Star Wars universe as Galen Erso in Rogue One. Fantastic in there too. Chaos Walking with Holland and Daisy Ridley, which was a weird movie. Then he joins the Harry Potter universe, replacing Johnny Depp as Grindelwald in The Secrets of Dumbledore. Then he hops over to the Indiana Jones universe as Dr. Voller in The Dial of Destiny. Then he returns to Disney to voice Kairos in Mufasa. So he's been really kind of franchise hopping, and I'm fine with that. He's probably most famous for is playing Hannibal in the Hannibal show, and then of course probably Le Chiffre in Casino Royale is probably the two that he's probably most famous for. But he's been in a lot of different franchises, and he's great. He's great in all of them. I really like him. My favorite role of his is probably Probably Le Chiffre. You know, he's got a interesting take on that character, and it's kind of creepy but entertaining at the same time. Where he's at the table playing cards, and he does that really weird wiping off the goo of his eye because he's got, you know, a damaged eyeball and it's kind of fake in there. So he's kind of like cleaning the mucus off of it. And then he's a Bond villain, but he has to take an inhaler every now and then. I mean, what's a more badass move than, you know, staring down your mortal enemy and shaking your inhaler to take a couple puffs? Like, it was a really interesting character, Le Chiffre, but Mads Mikkelsen does a fantastic job. I love him in anything that he does. So that kind of rounds up the cast. The director, Scott Derrickson, who has made quite a name for himself. He did Sinister, which we talked about during Fright Nights. I like Scott Derrickson. I think he's a pretty underrated director. He's most recently been involved with the Black Phone films. Let's pull up his filmography as a director, because he's also a writer, mainly a screenplay writer. Black Phone 2 and Black Phone. He helped out with the Snowpiercer show, Doctor Strange, of course, Sinister, The Earth Stood Still, the remake with Keanu Reeves, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. He did Hellraiser Inferno. Looks like his first movie was Love in the Ruins, which I've never seen. That was back in 95. The first movie I probably saw of his was gotta be The Day the Earth Stood Still. My favorite is probably Sinister, because Sinister is one of my favorite movies ever. I'm not a huge fan of the Black Phone, but I hear the second one's pretty good, so I'm probably going to add that to the list. Oh, yeah, and The Gorge with Miles Teller and Anna Taylor-Joy. Still need to see that one. That's the Apple Plus film that's I've been meaning to get to. But Scott Derrickson, I think, is a pretty good director. He's really good at those thriller horror stuff, especially with Sinister and Black Phone. I think Sinister is probably his like masterpiece so far, but he's really good. I know Sam Raimi ends up doing the sequel, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, but I would have been perfectly fine if Derrickson did that movie. But he took his chance with Doctor Strange, and I think he did a pretty good job. Now, I don't normally talk about the composers, but I had to I totally forgot that he was the composer here for this movie. It's Michael Giacchino, who has made quite a name for himself. He has composed so many great movies, and he's a great composer. I love him. He's definitely probably in my top 5. You know, there's my favorite, Hans Zimmer. You got John Williams. You've got Giacchino, of course. I really like Danny Elfman. You know, I'm a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man guy. That was, you know, probably the first comic book movie I ever saw in the theaters as a kid. So Danny Elfman has a special place in my heart. But yeah, Giacchino is fantastic. He did come back and do, you know, Fantastic Four. He most recently did Zootopia 2, which has been killing it in the box office. I need to see it. But I mean, he's done music for The Batman, Jurassic Park, Jurassic World. He did No Way Home. He was involved with a lot of these Disney movies. Coco, Incredibles. He did War for the Planet of the Apes. Rogue One, Doctor Strange, like I mentioned. Star Trek Beyond, Jurassic World, the first one. He did Inside Out, Jupiter Ascending. Like, so many incredible movies. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, 50-50, which I love. Cars, Super 8, Lost. Like, Land of the Lost, Up, Star Trek, Speed Racer, Cloverfield, like Ratatouille. Like, I mean, come on. That is quite a resume, Mr. Giacchino. So, fantastic job by him. I really like the music in this movie. That's why I wanted to mention him, even though I don't normally talk about the composers, unless his name's Hans Zimmer. Okay, so moving on. Like we've been doing, I wanted to just touch up on some comic versus film stuff. Like I said, I wasn't really too attached to the comics growing up, but I did find some interesting, you know, differences between the film and what the comic book's lore is. So first one, mastering the mystical arts. In the comic book, it actually takes Stephen Strange quite a number of years to become Sorcerer Supreme. But in this film, he accomplishes all that knowledge and skill in a matter of 18 months. So they really sped up the time frame for the movie. The Cloak of Levitation, which were introduced into this first movie. In the comic, it can't do anything but obey orders from other people. Whereas in the film, it's got free will. It's doing its own thing. It's got a mind of its own. It has that free will, which I think is a really fun element. I'm kind of glad they changed that because it adds kind of a sidekick feel to Doctor Strange. Just something for us to be entertained by, other than Benedict Cumberbatch's awesome performance. The sling rings. They don't exist in the comic book. This is a totally made up thing by the MCU to explain why people who aren't born with magical powers can travel instantaneously. Like Doctor Strange, he wasn't necessarily born with the mystical arts, but he was able to. Well, they kind of allude to maybe he was born with it, but I haven't really understood that part. Let's see if I can briefly look this up here. Because again, I'm not too familiar with the comic book, so I don't know exactly what the lore is. Let's see what this says. Strange doesn't have any innate powers or abilities, but he was trained by the Ancient One in Mordor. He is a human, not an alien with powers that they were born with or something like that, just like how Strange was trained in the way of the mystical arts and relies on magic. Okay, so he was not born with the magic, so he is one of those that has to use the sling ring to do it. So that's a really cool or interesting thing to add in there. And then the last one I've mentioned it already, but the Ancient One. In the comic, it's an old man. In here, it's Tilda Swinton, a woman. So when that was announced, that pissed off a lot of people. Not me, of course, because like I said, wasn't attached to the comics. I didn't care. I just cared about the performance, and she did a great job. So I got no issues there. And then on our Infinity Stone and tracker here, we've got another Infinity Stone. That is the Time Stone, or the Eye of Agamotto, as they refer to it in this movie. That's the Infinity Stone around Stephen Strange's neck, where he's able to manipulate time with the correct spells. So we can add that to our Infinity Stone tracker. So we've been introduced to the Mind Stone, the Space Stone, the Power Stone, the Reality Stone, and now the Time Stone. So we're missing one more stone, the Soul Stone, which we will discover in Infinity War. So we got a little bit of ways to go till we get introduced to that final Infinity Stone, but we've got 5 out of the 6 so far. Moving on, we've got the iconic scenes. This was pretty easy for me. So the first one I have written down is the car crash. Now again, reminder, when I mean by iconic scenes, this is scenes that pop into your head when you first hear the title Doctor Strange. So when I hear Doctor Strange, I think about the car crash, where he is busy talking on the phone, trying to pick his next client or case or whatever you want to call it as a surgeon. And he's going through. That was a really cool call out when they get to a colonel who has been paralyzed partially and needs surgery on his spine. That's alluding to Colonel Rhodes after the events of Civil War. So that's a really big hint that Doctor Strange happens after Captain America Civil War in that timeline. But I really like the car crash. Going into this movie, I knew kind of the backstory of him. I knew, his hands got messed up, and that's what attracted him to get into the mystical arts to hopefully heal his hands. But I like the CGI. I like the action that goes into it. You get to actually see his hands get crushed by the dashboard in that slow-mo shot. So that's really cool to see. The next one I have is Strange being introduced to the multiverse by Tilda Swinton's Ancient One. That one I think that's my favorite scene and most iconic to me. That's where I first think about when I hear Doctor Strange, is that incredible sequence of the Ancient One throwing Doctor Strange through all the vast universes and dimensions. You get that crazy scene where he's looking at his hands and even more hands, and then they end up grabbing him and he goes inside of himself. It's was really cool to see the different dimensions out there and the CGI that they chose to bring those dimensions to life, and how they interacted with Benedict Cumberbatch was really, really cool. Then we get the mirror dimension fight with Caecilius and his zealots, as they call them. This is a really cool action sequence where then eventually the Ancient One shows up and we get that cool fight between her and Caecilius. This is where it gets revealed that the Ancient One also pulls from the dark dimension, just like Caecilius and the zealots do, which they were told not to do. So they think of her as a hypocrite. So she admits that sometimes you have to pull from the dark dimension. Well, she was doing it in order to live longer because she was kind of the unique one where she figured out to draw power from the dark dimension so that she can live hundreds of years, because most of the time ancient ones have a pretty normal lifespan, maybe 100 years. But she hasn't been able to be around for much longer because it gets revealed that she is pulling from the dark dimension to live longer. So we get that big reveal, but the fight itself is really cool, and all the CGI and all that with the mirror dimension is really cool. The mirror dimension, of course, being that pocket in space where you can do whatever you want to the environment and everybody around it doesn't get affected. It's kind of just a free for all in there. Really cool effect that they did. Then the next one I have is Strange reversing time in Hong Kong when they go to fight Caecilius and try to stop Dormammu. Really cool effect where it kind of freezes for a while and he's reversing it. People cooking, or the food's coming back in there, or the walls are coming back into the buildings, and the fish tank was really cool with all the water and the fish going back in there. But we also get the Caecilius's goons, the zealots, kind of getting intertwined with that stuff. Like one of them gets stuck in that fish tank. The other, Caecilius himself, gets stuck inside the wall, which was a really cool effect. I like that. And then the last one is the part at the end where Stephen Strange gets this idea to stop Dormammu by putting him in a time loop with the time stone, which is really, really cool. I'm stepping on favorite quotes, but one of the quotes I always remember is Dormammu, I've come to bargain. He says it like 20 times. But that's a really cool scene where you get to see Dormammu kill Doctor Strange a couple of times. Now, it's implied that they were doing it like 100 or so times, but we only see probably like 5 or 6. But it's kind of implied that they've been doing it for a while. So then eventually Dormammu breaks and is just like, okay, release me. I will disappear. Just get me out of this time loop, which is hell. And that's how Stephen Strange is able to defeat Dormammu. So those are kind of scenes. Like, again, probably my favorite and most iconic to me is that scene where Strange gets introduced to the multiverse by getting thrown in through all those dimensions by the Ancient One. Really awesome effects. Favorite quotes, I've already talked about one. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Another one by Doctor Strange. The warnings. The warnings come after the spell. I really like that one at the end. I think before that, they talk about how, they really should put the warnings before the spell. And then this happens at the very end of the movie when he's kind of talking shit to Caecilius, where he's like, the warnings come after the spell. And that's when we get that good moment of Benedict Wong just bursting out laughing because he loved it so much. This is kind of the tagline for Mordo. The bill comes due. This is kind of like his motto, where every action you have to pay a price eventually. And for Strange to use the time stone and putting Dormammu in that time loop and doing everything that he does, this is where Mordo is like, I can't be a part of this. You're too reckless. You're destroying the law of nature. Reversing time and changing all the fates of all those people in Hong Kong. And that's where he goes. The bill comes due. Eventually, your actions here in Hong Kong will have effects on you, and you will have to pay that price. And it's a really good line. I really like it. The Ancient One. Death is what gives life meaning. To know your days are numbered, your time is short. So yeah, enjoy your time, everybody. I mean, we just talked about James Van Der Beek passing away. He was only 48 years old. It's treat every day like your last. It's a good model to live by by the Ancient One. And then Doctor Strange. Just this line is probably the first one that comes to mind when I hear Doctor Strange, and it's when Strange goes back to the hospital after he gets stabbed, and he goes, "Christine." I really, it's just the tone of voice that Benedict Cumberbatch uses, where he's like, "Christine," and it's really funny. The second time he does that, when he brings the Ancient One in after she gets stabbed, and Christine hears Doctor Strange go, "Christine," and she goes, "Oh God, no!" But then she realizes that this woman is dying. But that's the line. It's really short, and it probably sounds stupid, but that's the line that I always think about when I think of Doctor Strange. Fun facts. I've got quite a few here, so we'll kind of rip through them here, and then we'll jump into the rankings today. So Rachel McAdams' startled reaction in the broom closet was genuine. That scene where Doctor Strange goes through the portal and the broom falls down. Since the mop handle fell completely by accident and scared McAdams almost out of her skin, Scott Derrickson decided to keep the reaction in the film since she never broke character. It's really fun when things like that happen by accident, and it's a really, really good scene in there. According to the 2021 book, The Story of Marvel Studios, The Making of Marvel Cinematic Universe, Benedict Cumberbatch was originally offered the part of Malekith, the villain in Thor: The Dark World. Despite being a fan of the MCU, he declined because the part did not thrill him enough. Smart on you. I think we mentioned that in that episode that he was offered it and ultimately denied it. Thank you, God, that he did, because we probably never would have gotten him as Doctor Strange. And he preferred to wait for something a bit more juicy. Well, guess what, buddy? He was later Marvel president Kevin Feige's first choice for the lead role of Stephen Strange. But he initially had to decline the offer due to his theater commitments playing William Shakespeare's Hamlet, which clashed with the film's proposed shooting date. Joaquin Phoenix was then the studio's second choice for the lead role, but after a few months of deliberation, he eventually turned down the offer due to his reluctance to do a multi-picture deal that was required by the studio if he signed on. When the film's release date was then pushed back from July to November, Cumberbatch was finally able to commit to the shooting. Funny how things just fall into place because they are meant to be. Couple of what-if castings here for this Ancient One. So Morgan Freeman, Ken Watanabe, and Bill Nye were supposedly considered for the role. Morgan Freeman, I don't think that would have worked. Bill Nye would have been interesting. Ken Watanabe would have been pretty cool. I'm kind of bummed out that he hasn't been in the MCU yet. I hope they get him, though. He would have been great as the Ancient One if things didn't really work out with Tilda Swinton, or if he was, the first choice to do it. Benedict Cumberbatch embarked on a strict training regimen by hitting the gym with the use of a personal trainer to beef up for the role. Cumberbatch would drink protein shakes and eat double the amount of calories. He looked pretty good. He had one shirtless scene in here, and it looked like the work paid off. Several times during close-ups, Caecilius can be seen with tears running down his cheeks. Apparently, the makeup used irritated Matt Mikkelsen's eyes, yet he never showed it. Bothered him. I didn't talk about that, but as you see throughout the movie, the more he draws from the dark dimension, him and the Zealot's eyes start to change into what looks like Dormammu's. A lot of makeup was put on his eyeballs, and apparently it was irritating him. Scott Derrickson heard people say that the big city folding scene is a ripoff of Inception. But while they drew on it, I thought Inception was one of the most visually interesting movies of the last 6 or 7 years. But it was 7 years ago now that it came out, and I felt like it was the tip of an interesting visual effects iceberg. And I wanted to go crazy with the idea of spatial manipulation. He says that he was building on Christopher Nolan's sequence the way Nolan was building on Our Majesty's Secret Service back in 1969 for the climactic snow fight at the end of Inception. That's what filmmakers do. We borrow from other sources. He's not wrong. That snow sequence at the end of Inception was basically an homage to a James Bond film which was on Your Majesty's Secret Service. So I totally support him looking at Inception, being inspired, and kind of basing the folding city folding scene in that mirror dimension from Inception. Now, there's similarities, yes, but it's still completely different. The idea behind it's different. The mechanics behind it is completely different as well. Like, I get it. I get the frustration with a lot of fans when they're like, well, that's clearly a ripoff of that. Yeah, but it's not that simple. It's taking inspiration from each other. A lot of these directors, as they work together in Hollywood, they start to form bonds and respect for each other, and they pay homages to each other in their own films. It's what filmmakers do, just like Scott Derrickson did. That's just what they do. They do that, and it's out of respect. It's not out of like, oh, that was a cool scene, but I can do it better. No, it's about paying the respect that it deserves and putting your own twist to it. So I totally support that. Famous voice actor James Arnold Taylor dubbed over some of Benedict Cumberbatch's grunts. I thought that was interesting. I guess they didn't like his grunts, so they went and dubbed it. Interesting. And then lastly, Mickelson not only loved the wire work, but he was also good at it. 50 years old at the time, and he did almost all of his own stunts during that hallway fight sequence. Good on you. Same thing with Willem Dafoe with Green Goblin in No Way Home. He did all those stunts himself because that's what he wanted. He wanted to do it authentically. And that's how Mads Mikkelsen is too. He does want to do the stunts authentically in all the movies he's a part of. So mad respect for him, for Mads Mikkelsen. So yeah, Doctor Strange, I really like. It was a really cool way to introduce Doctor Strange in the MCU and to a lot of fans out there that probably didn't know a whole lot of Doctor Strange like I did. Most of my knowledge of him is from the MCU. Over the years now, since he's been a part of the MCU, I've done a little bit of research here or there just to kind of get more familiar with the comic book version of him. But Benedict Cumberbatch is a terrific Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange in the MCU, and I absolutely love it. This is a great movie to revisit. This is the part of the universe that I don't really revisit a whole lot of times. I'm always going towards the Spider-Man movies, the Iron Man movies, the Avengers movies. Doctor Strange always kind of falls through the cracks, and I'm really glad I got to revisit it for the podcast today. So wrapping things up like we always do, let's dive into those rankings with the MCU ranking, the villain scale, and then that popcorn rating. So first up, we've got the MCU ranking with Wonder Man. We are now at 53 projects. So I've got Doctor Strange at 34. Looking what's around it, right below it at 35, Iron Man 2. Captain America, the First Avenger at 36. Wonder Man is where we put 37 last time. 38, Captain America, Brave New World. 39 is Thor. And then to go into the 40s, at number 40, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. A couple things above it, Iron Man 3 at 33, Black Widow at 32, Avengers Age of Ultron at 31, and then Loki Season 2 at 30. So I was kind of looking through this list a lot after watching it, and I left it there at 34. I can't move it up any more than that because I really like Iron Man 3, Black Widow, Age of Ultron. We'll see how I feel when we revisit Black Widow during Marvel Friday, but I remember really liking it a lot, especially Florence Pugh's character in there. But being at 34, it's not bad. It's pretty good. Out of 53 projects, we're nowhere near the really bad ones. So I think 34 is right where it needs to be. The villain scale. Now, a reminder, if you're new to the show, this is a new scale that I have created for the Marvel Friday where we rate the villain of the movie. We look at the performance, we look at the costume, we look at the motivation for the villain. So for Caecilius, played by Mads Mikkelsen, I went for 3 Thanos heads for him. I really like the performance. I think he did a really good job. The motivation, now during the research for today, Scott Derrickson really emphasized that they wanted to dig a little deeper and make Caecilius a relatable villain. being a part of this group, this community, and then being told not to do something, but then finding out that your leader is doing it as a hypocrite, that could really destroy the psyche, really question your faith, so to speak, and belief in the community. So I think the motivation for him was pretty good. Now it could be written much better. I think there's a lot more that they can do this character. It wasn't fully fleshed out. There was quite a bit more that they could have given Mads Mikkelsen to chew on and to kind of use on screen to build the character out more. And it's a villain that didn't really blow you away, but you could somewhat understand why he is the way he is, or why he's going up against the Ancient One and Doctor Strange and all, and trying to convert as many people as he can to the Dark Dimension, to Dormammu, because he feels betrayed by the Ancient One, which, I mean, it's understandable. Like I said, being a part of this community for so long and then finding out that the Ancient One was a hypocrite, that they themselves have been pulling from the Dark Dimension when she told everybody not to do that it was forbidden. So then you start to question everything, and it was pretty well written, but at the same time, there's definitely a lot more that could have been done with the character. And when you have Mads Mikkelsen, you got to give him a lot to chew on, like they did for Casino Royale. Like, it seems like he didn't do a whole lot, but the Sheaf character was really, really well thought out and really performed well. And I mean, his performance is good in here too. The costume is kind of whatever. He is probably in the same outfit that he's worn for years when he was a part of, Cosmata. And now with the makeup, it was kind of ridiculous as it was, spreading across his face. But, it had a pretty decent explanation for it, where as you draw from the Dark Dimension, you start turning into the creatures that are in the Dark Dimension, like Dormammu. But I think the costume could have been a little bit more thought out and maybe more creative. But I think Through Thanos' Heads is pretty good for a character like that. I think 2 is way too low for that, and I just couldn't quite get to 4 Thanos Heads. So I think 3 is where we're gonna go here for Caecilius. And then the popcorn rating, we're gonna go with 3 popcorn buckets here. Now, I really, really like it. But like I said, I like Multiverse of Madness better. I think this movie walked so that Multiverse could run. We're getting introduced to the character. This movie doesn't really blow you off your socks, but it's still entertaining with the visual effects that they do with the mirror dimension. Benedict Cumberbatch is really awesome in his performance as Stephen Strange. Rachel McAdams doesn't get a whole lot to do in here, but she's still great as Christine. And Caecilius, Mads Mikkelsen does a really good job at being the villain. Tilda Swinton doesn't seem like she gets a whole lot to do either, but she's still pretty good as the Ancient One. So I feel like you could have gotten more out of this movie, more crazy visuals, more, blowing off your socks scenes. The fight sequences themselves were entertaining enough to keep your attention going, but like I said, they didn't really blow you away. Just a couple scenes of the visuals really blow you away. So that's why I ultimately went with 3 popcorn buckets. But I think that's still a pretty modest rating for Doctor Strange 1 in the MCU. So that pretty much does it for today's Marvel Friday. Next time, let's take a look here and see what is next. Wonder Man kind of threw a wrench in things, but I think in a good way. So let's look at the theatrical timeline for the MCU. I think it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but I want to make sure before I tell you guys, just so I don't tell you wrong, in case you are following the show here. Doctor Strange. Yep, it is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the next one. So that'll be the next one, next Friday. And then we'll also cap off the Gamerverse event with Free Guy, starring Ryan Reynolds. I'm very excited to do that. And then we'll jump into another event that I will announce at the end of the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 episode. So we'll start another event alongside Marvel Friday. Also, check out the football podcast brought to you by Quantum podcast. That is the End Zone Report. We will be finishing off the 2025 season with the Super Bowl reaction, Super Bowl 60, as the Seahawks have won that Super Bowl. And then we will take a break. And then when the NFL draft arrives, we'll do an episode there where we react to the first round of the draft. And then we'll get into some off-season stuff with like mock draft for fantasy. We'll kind of do a off-season recap with whatever trades or cuts end up getting happen. So we'll take a short break. But we're going to do 2 episodes a week for cinematic reviews. And then we'll get into some off-season stuff for the End Zone Report. So plenty of content to come out. So with that, have a good weekend, everybody. Happy early Valentine's Day for all the couples out there. Hope you enjoy a night out on the town with your significant other. And we will see you all next time on the show.